Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar sponsored by the CTE Technical Assistance Center of New York. A few technical points to cover before we begin. All attendees are initially muted. We will take comments and questions throughout the webinar. To pose a question, click the raise your hand icon and you will be announced and unmuted. You may also submit a question to be addressed by typing it into the questions pane on the control panel. All questions are logged and any unanswered questions will be addressed by today's presenters via email. If you become disconnected, you may contact us at 518-723-2137. For your information and reference, today's webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing on the CTE Technical Assistance Center website at nyctecenter.org within 72 hours. If you have questions or suggestions regarding upcoming webinars, please contact us at ctetac@spnet.us.
Thank you, Gretchen. I'd like to welcome everyone this afternoon as we do the next in our series of webinars around the Career Instructional Model. I'm Dick Jones and been facilitating each of these sessions, and I have with me a principal and teacher from Cabell Midland High School in West Virginia. And I'll introduce them a little bit later as we get into having them share some instructional practices related to this aspect of assessing for proficiency. I hope that some of you have had the opportunity to view some of the previous webinars. This is really the third one in our series as we go into this instructional model. We want to make this an interactive sharing session. We have some content that we want to share, but we'd particularly like to answer any questions that you've got. And as Gretchen said, you can either do that by raising your hand and we'll turn your mic on so that you can ask orally, or you can submit a question in the question box and Gretchen can pass that on to me. The model that we talk about is this career instructional model of 6 elements that, as we focus on career readiness and the kind of instruction that it takes to prepare students for that career readiness, reflects these 6 elements. In each of this webinars, we've been highlighting one of these. In this one, we're highlighting the assess for proficiency. This is an instructional model that really works to prepare students for their future. When we talk about preparing students for 21st century learning, that's not a new curriculum. It's focusing on the things that we know well, work well within the curriculum. It really addresses this notion of college and career readiness, and particularly a lot of the skills that students need in perseverance and relationships and working with others that are going to enable them to be successful in their future. Those of you that are familiar with the Rigor Relevance Framework and what Quadrant D learning is, these elements focus those aspects of instruction that move toward Quadrant D learning. Reflects what we know about brain research and the way that students learn effectively, and it also is a universal model that applies to all disciplines. It's not a career and technical education model, it's not a mathematics model, it's a model that relates across all grade levels and all disciplines. And most importantly, it can be data-driven, and that's what we're excited about are the surveys that we've developed for teachers to use and reflect about their own instruction. And I'll talk about those at the end of the webinar. We have a one-page flyer or handout that is a nice overview of the model for those of you that haven't been introduced to it before. Here's a web link where you can download that. We also have copies of that on the Technical Assistance website so that you can have that as a handy reference in understanding the full model. Today we're going to talk about one element of that model. Also want to remind you about the Twitter link and the fact that we have a Twitter feed on the career model that is an ongoing tune for your ideas and around resources that relate to the career model. I'm going to spend a little bit of time reviewing this element up front and what we mean for proficiency. And then I'll be asking teachers to share their specific decisions and how they've been addressing this aspect of, that slide says relevance, but it should be about for proficiency. In preparation for this, we encourage people to look at a video. Rather than making this a straight presentation, some information that I wanted to share around the background of this particular issue of assessing for proficiency. I did a video interview with Dr. Kathy Weigel, and I hope that some of you had the opportunity to view that. If you didn't, here's the link to take advantage of that. It really provides a great background of some of her experience in her school. And you'll hear some references to Kathy in the conversation today from Cabell. So I've got a poll question. We've got a couple of those that we're going to do to add some interaction to get you to respond to some of the things that we're doing today. And the first one is to find out how many of you actually did have the opportunity to go ahead and view preview the video from Dr. Weigel. So Gretchen, if you'll put the poll question up, we'll ask people to respond and let us know how many had a chance to see that video. We got the poll question up, Gretchen? Did we lose Gretchen?
Dick, your poll results are up. 64%.
Oh, okay, great. I see
64% did not get to view it.
Okay, just a few people got to see that, so encourage you to do that. We may make some references back to some of the things that were in that. As we think about this particular aspect of assess for proficiency, the question is, what does that really relate to? In the model, we have 5 actions that delineate a little bit more about what teachers need to do in this aspect of assessing for proficiency. And let me just review those. Here are the 5 elements. The first one is making sure that assessments focus on what's really essential for students to learn. Sometimes we get involved in assessing what's convenient or easy or quantifiable rather than really making sure in our plans for instruction we're assessing what we really expect students to learn, whether that's in the form of short open-ended questions or whether that's in a complex performance our students are doing. And so that's one key element. Another one is to make sure that students understand the assessment criteria. Sometimes assessments are a surprise, and if we're trying to move students to a level of proficiency, they need to understand very clearly what are they going to be assessed on. And if those are going to be multiple criteria, if you're assessing the quality of writing in addition to the content, students need to understand those particular criteria. Just a good teaching practice that relates to this aspect of proficiency. The next one is to scale assessments for proficiency. And that really causes you to think about your grading systems to make sure your grading systems are geared toward moving students toward a level of proficiency. There's a lot of things within that, and that's going to be the center of a lot of our conversation today, in making sure that students have an opportunity to demonstrate their best work in being proficient and to continue to work toward that. And sometimes averaging all those grades together may not be the best grading system to really move a student toward proficiency. Your grading system should all be focused on learning and not so much on grading. I joke about one of the worst technologies in schools over the last couple of decades has been the calculator. Not that we're using the calculator and not developing math skills, but the calculator has made it easy for teachers to average a bunch of grades together and come up with an average grade for students. And sometimes that's not the true measure of proficiency. The fourth one is about making sure that your grading system tries to extend the learning. That you don't want a student to become satisfied and they've earned as much as they want to, whether that's just a passing grade or a B average, but you're always driving the student toward higher levels of learning. And then finally, the aspect of grading that recognizes the purpose of grading is communication, and that parents and students are well informed as in understanding what grades, that they are clear information, it's timely, frequent information, and making sure that students and parents understand the progress that students are making in that learning. So those are the 5 elements that make up the criteria. I dug out of my archives a couple of cartoons that illustrate some of the challenges around grading. This is a real emotional aspect of teaching and learning. The teachers' grading systems that they've used for a considerable amount of time, that they're comfortable with, that in many ways they use those to maintain some control over students within their classroom. But students often get confused about measuring the true learning, and this one cartoon reminds me about that. And sometimes we have to ask what the grades really do reflect. Does it reflect how much the student knows, or does it reflect some of the quality of teaching or the way that that teacher approached that instruction in getting that student to that level of proficiency? And sometimes grades are a surprise, and this cartoon illustrates that. That reminds me of one of the things that I told my children, that I cared less about what the grades were, but I never wanted to be surprised. And I think that aspect of not being able to explain the level of learning reflects poorly on a grading system. And finally, this one, and a quote from Bob Marzano: "The grades are so imprecise that they are almost meaningless." Just because we can put a number on something, and particularly average 10 numbers together to come up with a very detailed number, does not mean that it's a valid measure of student learning. And we need to be honest about that as we use those measures to talk about student success. So about thinking about those 5 actions, I've got another poll question before we get into our conversation. For those of you looking at those actions, what action do you think is most important in helping students to become career ready? We need to do all of those, but let me ask your opinion about which of those do you think is really more important in affecting student success. There's the 5 elements again, and if you would put the poll question up, Gretchen. Okay, 2 strong ones. Relate assessments for essential learning was 38%. So making sure we're assessing and grading the most important things we want students to learn. And then pleasantly surprised on this one, using assessments and grades to extend the learning and really challenging students to do more. And then the lowest one is keeping students and parents informed, and only 6% of you thought that was most important. Well, let's go to another poll question. We'll do another one real quick. And what action do you think is the greatest challenge for teachers to really accomplish as they try to implement these actions? Which one do you think is the most difficult or the most challenging for teachers? Okay, we've got our results up there. 44% scaling for proficiency, and I'm not surprised about that. This is the area that really requires some thinking about your grading systems, and there isn't one perfect grading system, so it requires some work, and I'd agree with that. And rating at 0 on the other end, relating assessments to essential learning, you think that's one of the things area probably teachers are most comfortable doing. And then pretty even between ensuring the students understand the criteria, using assessments and grades to extend learning, and keeping students and parents informed. Those are 17 to 22%. So interesting response. Well, let me introduce my colleagues here, and I'm really delighted to have these three join me today. I can talk about the broad picture of some of these issues in the variety of schools that I've had a chance to work with, but joining me today to talk about this issue and share some of their real-world practices in implementing these in these schools are Kelly Daniels, the principal of Cabell Middle School from West Virginia, and Kelly is somebody I've known for about 8 or 9 years, I guess, Kelly. And two of her teachers, Rebecca Atkins, science teacher, and Jessica Bowers, a math teacher. So welcome and thank you for joining us today. And let me get to you talking about this aspect of assessing for proficiency. And Kelly, perhaps a little bit, you could share a little bit of your experience of coming into the school and how you really recognized that this was an issue that you needed to work on with staff.
Thank you, Dick. I want to take this opportunity to tell the participants in the webinar today that if you get the opportunity, you really need to go and watch the video that Dr. Weigel completed that's on YouTube, because it tells you not only her history of her school, but it tells you a little bit about my history, because the time period she refers to in that video, I was actually serving as an assistant principal under her and watched this grading for proficiency evolve at that high school where we were both employed. At the end of the 2009 school year, I had to leave Florida and come home to West Virginia, and I was fortunate enough to be employed here at Cabell Midland High School as an assistant principal. The duty that I was assigned that very first year was to take the 9th grade academy that was not working well and to make it a more functioning, efficient academy. But as you know, anytime an administrator walks onto a campus, you just can't walk in and make changes. You first have to watch to see what's going on in order to make the changes that are appropriate, not only for the teachers involved, but most importantly for the students. So during that first year, we watched the practices of the teachers in grading, how students were scheduled, and what our overall, we called the failure rate of our students were, so that we could begin to make a plan for improvement for our school. And we had some pretty hard conversations with staff. And one of the ones that I often tell when I talk about proficiency grading is a conversation I had with a math teacher in my classroom. She was a 9th grade, or in her classroom, she was a 9th grade math teacher, and at that time she was teaching Algebra 1. And she had a student who was sitting in her classroom who could pass every quiz, every test, every semester exam that she could give him with a 92% or better. But yet that student did not pass her course or receive credit for that Algebra 1 credit because he didn't do his homework or he wouldn't participate in class. So the question I asked the teacher was, why is it important? He's proven to you that he understands the material and that he is proficient in the what we call the content standards and objectives here in West Virginia. So why is it important that he complete all of this work? And the teacher was very adamant that that work was more important than his proficiency on the CSOs. And as she began thinking about what was coming out of her mouth, she got very angry. And I remember her face turning 15 different shades of red that day. And she had to walk away from me and say, we'll talk later about this. But what she was truly struggling with was what all teachers struggle with, and that's the ethical part of grading. And I always refer to that as the great American paper chase that teachers have. They get so wrapped up in the assignments and the assessments that they are giving the students, sometimes they forget that we're here to measure the proficiency on those content standards and objectives that we are charged with teaching our students. So we began as a ninth grade academy to talk about those things, and we began struggling with how does this look in a comprehensive high school. And the two ladies that I have here with you today have been with me since the very beginning of this and can tell you where we started when we started talking about proficiency grading, how we implemented it, and how over the course of the past 4 years it has changed. And I want everyone to understand that once you put a plan in place like this, it is a living, breathing animal in your school. There is never a year that we don't go back and we review our proficiency grading practices and refine them so that they become better for our students. So with that being said, I'm going to turn things over to Ms. Bowers, who's going to talk to you about a specific standard that she had in her mathematics class and how she tailored it to a grading for proficiency example.
Hello. We've prepared a few slides to show you the process that we went through to actually get to what is called proficiency grading. So if you look at this first slide, this is a CSO, or a standard, in West Virginia. It is part of the Common Core standards. And if you can read this standard, you will see that it is a really dense standard. So it says to solve linear equations and inequalities, and then it adds at the bottom to other equations with only letters. This is very difficult for our students to master. So Dick, if you could go to the next slide. We actually have to break this standard down into what we call I can statements. So in order to tell whether the student has mastered that standard, we have to go through a series of steps first. Before a student can solve any equation, they have to solve a one-step, then a two-step, then it goes on in that order until finally you can get to solving literal equations, which are equations with just letters. So the first step in even beginning proficiency grading is what you call the essentials to learning. We call them our learning targets, or these I can statements. So if you could go to the next slide. This is called a skills-based syllabus, and it just states on the left side the skill that the student needs to master, and on the right side the series of tasks that we'll go through to help them master those skills. So these skills, if you look, let's look specifically at the two-step equations. I would have had my students do a foldable. That would be some form of notes. They would do an activity. They would do a writing prompt. That would be all kind of informal assessments. And then finally they would take a quiz on that specific standard. So then if you can go to the next slide, we have some examples of what a grade book would actually look like with these activities.
Okay, so whenever we changed our vision or opinion on grading, we had to change our grade book as well. And what you're looking at here is our grade book set up to show the I can statements or learning targets. So each assignment that we assign only refers back to that learning targets. If a student, this way, if a student did not turn in the assignment for I can solve one-step equations, we would put an X there for that assignment. They didn't do their homework or they didn't finish it in class, we would put an X there. And then they turned in the others. At the end, whenever we have a test on that, the X does not hurt their grade, and if they show proficiency on the test, we can go back and look and see if they show proficiency on the learning target.
So if you look at this specific student as an example, student A basically turned in nothing. If you can look at the grade book, this student did no homework, nothing in class, they didn't do any writing prompts, but they did get on their test the assessment where they can demonstrate that they know this material. They got a 45 out of 50, 40 out of 50, 46 out of 50, and then on the final test got an overall 80%. So by regular standards, by turning in no homework, this student would have failed with a 52%. But if you go back and do what we call proficiency grading, and put an X in the place of all those homework assignments, you can truly see this student has mastered the material, has mastered it to a 90% B. They know what they're doing, they just didn't demonstrate it based on homework or other assignments. If you could go to the next slide, we can look at another student, another example. So this would be student B, and we're looking at the exact same standards here, but I've highlighted in red the grades that they got on their quizzes. So if you look, this student did a little bit more in class, a little bit more homework, but they performed very poorly on all of their quizzes throughout. So if you look at the example of two-step equations, they got a 25 out of 50, a 20 out of 50 on the next one, a 25 out of 50. Those are all failing grades going throughout the unit. But when they got to the end, this student finally understood what was going on at the end. And the final test on the material, they got a 90%. So is it fair, once a student has mastered the material, maybe it just took a student a little bit longer to understand the overall concept, is it fair to still give them a 62% F when they know what they're doing? So by proficiency grading, you go back and put an X in the place where the homework assignments would be. And if you look, the overall grade of the content was a 90 out of 100. So you can go back and change those quiz grades. Instead of having a 25 out of 50, they now know what was on that quiz. They know that material now. They didn't only know half of the material when they started. So now you can go back and change those quiz grades to reflect their overall grade at the end. So we would change the quiz grades to maybe 45 out of 50, because that would relate right to a 90 out of 100. So in the end, this student would have received an 89%, which is a B, because that's how much content they know.
What is important to understand is while these ladies are talking about the skills-based syllabus and how their gradebook is set up, all of their assignments relate back to that skills-based syllabus. Every assignment they give has that I can statement on it. Every test is broken down into pieces that has the I can statement over a group of questions, so that when they go back and they're talking about inserting grades to show the proficiency of these students, they're actually referring to portions of an assessment that a student has completed so that they can make those ethical judgments appropriately.
I think that's really key, Kelly, that you talk about that there's a lot of planning that goes into this to make this work, but this isn't just saying, oh, we're adjusting grades because they got another grade at the end. This only works if you really have thought through the curriculum and what are the formative steps to get to that overall performance that relates to that standard. And then the student is really being judged by that overall proficiency.
That's absolutely right, Dick. And without that skills-based syllabus, without breaking down the curriculum into those smaller chunks, we wouldn't be able to accomplish this at the rate that we have accomplished it. And I think it's also important to note that it also breaks down what you're doing with your students in what I call kid-friendly language. They understand exactly what the teacher's attempting to accomplish on any given day, because they know what I can statement the lesson that they are doing is related to.
I'm going to interrupt for a second. There's a couple questions.
Sure,
the first question was essentially this audience member is concerned about the message that this is sending students, saying that are we not holding them accountable for their work and respecting due dates, and how that might later affect their performance in college or a job.
So I struggled with that as well. Whenever we first did that, that was my main, I was really upset. I had really smart kids who figured out what was going on and decided, well, I'm not going to do homework. I already know this stuff and whatnot. And so what I had to do was really relate my teaching to relevancy, and so it was meaningful and really had to challenge them. As far as accountability, I'm not sure that that's what I'm supposed to teach a student. I'm here to grade them on their knowledge and what they learn for my content. So we had to totally change our thinking on how we were grading students. Are we grading them whether they turn the homework in or not, or are we grading them for what they know?
And that, again, it comes with time also, and the students seeing how if they don't do the assignments and things that we give, they do not generally perform well on any assessment that we will give them. And usually it takes, in my class, it takes a few weeks. I don't say all of this up front. I don't tell any of my students, okay, if you don't do this, you won't count off for it. I don't say that. We still have deadlines. We still have due dates. There are still things that they have to turn in. That's the only way you can assess some things is through a writing assignment or a lab in a science class, a presentation in another class. There are some things that you cannot go back and proficiency grade. In that case, they just have to be given some sort of an alternate assignment. So there still are deadlines. There still is responsibility embedded. It's just making sure that we understand that they have learned the material that we are required to teach them.
Jessica, did you find that you began to throw out some of the homework assignments that really weren't meaningfully tied to the standard that you were after?
Oh my gosh, yes. My first year teaching, I did have a textbook to use, and just in reading my standards, I realized you don't teach a textbook. That was the main thing that I learned, is that you don't just go with a textbook. A lot of the things in textbooks aren't in your standards. And by really digging in these standards and looking at the I can statements that you have to build, and just breaking down your standard and then being able to build it back in a way that a student can understand it, that was, I guess, one of the biggest challenges for me at first as a younger teacher, not having that book to go by and that perfect guide to tell me, what to do next.
And when we started this, Dick, it's real important to know that these skills-based syllabi evolved over the course of a full year. That was the piece that we had to have in place in order to move into the proficiency grading part. And we're not going to sit here and tell you that we didn't make the mistake of telling the kids what we were doing up front, because we did. And that year was extremely difficult on all of us. But as you implement these things, you learn lessons each and every year, and that's what I was referring to earlier when I said it's important that you go back and you refine what you do. So now our teachers don't spill the beans, for lack of a better term, all up front. They work with what the students have done. They go back and they make some adjustments, and then they clue them in. It's not, if you don't do this, it's not going to penalize you, and we don't want anyone to think that that's what we tell our students, because that's not accurate.
Great. Gretchen, did you have a second question?
We do. We have a couple more. The next one is, how is this different from weighting grades, as what I'm hearing is that the final assessment is what's most important?
Did you hear that, ladies?
Yes, we've heard it. We're kind of discussing how to answer. I don't have much experience with weighting grades.
Well, it's different because of the way the assessment is set up. If you look at the assessment, and we're happy to send you copies of what we have here from Cabell Midland. If you look at the assessment, it's broken down in pieces, just like any good assessment is put together. To us, ultimately, what is most important is that they have learned the material. And while we keep referring back to a test, it may not be an exam that the students have taken that shows that their proficiency. It may be another assignment that the ladies have assigned to them that may show their proficiency in one specific skill, and they will use the information from that assignment to take the place of some of the other assignments that they have given. So it's not, everything is not tied to a test, and I'm sorry if we gave you that impression. It's going through and understanding exactly what your assignments are assessing each and every time that they are given to the students, and making sure that you can relate them back to one of those I can statements for the students, so that you are giving them multiple times to actually show that, demonstrate their knowledge to you, and you can use those assessments to assist you through the proficiency grading process.
Yeah. As I see it, there is an element of weighting here, but what you've done goes beyond that, I think, in building the continuity through that standard-based syllabus. And the aspect of the I can statement is an element that really helps to build student ownership, because you can communicate very clearly to the student what they're going to have to accomplish in order to become proficient through that entire unit.
Yes, Dick, and those I can statements they're on our boards, they're displayed in our rooms, so the students can see, an overall for the whole unit or a chapter that we're going through. They can see that as we're going through it, and I actually in my classroom I check them off as we cover it. This is where you should be. You should know how to do this. We've covered that. You should know how to do this. We've been there. And they can use that, and they can see that on every assignment we give, every quiz we give, every writing we give. That I can is tied to that, and they know what is being expected of them, and they know themselves, do I know how to do this?
Right. I've got a couple questions, but Gretchen, have you got some more from the...
We do. We have a hand raised in the audience, so I'm going to unmute Aiken Wilson.
That question was already answered. Thanks.
Okay. And we have one more question. It says, were these grades connected with project-based instruction?
The grades that you see, yes. Different activities here were connected. I'm trying to look at those specific ones that I put on here. The partner set activities, that was within groups. Pass the problem activity, that was in groups.
The answer simply is some of them are and some of them are not. It's all in how the teacher designs the delivery of the instruction.
I hope that answers the question. Yes, some of them were project-based, some of them were activity-based, but some of it was at times you have to do direct instruction, and the students have to demonstrate that in a paper and pencil way.
And a way that my project-based lessons work really well with ICANS is to make the rubric very relevant. And if the ICANS are there in the rubric, what I am grading that project for, that helps with the project-based lessons.
And we have one more question. How much is retesting incorporated into the proficiency model?
Retesting is absolutely essential. Dick, there's actually one more slide after this. If you could go to that next slide. Oops, one too many. Okay, if you look at this slide, this student C has turned in very little homework, has done very few assignments, and his grade reflects that. This is the most typical look you will see if a student doesn't do those assignments throughout and then goes and tries to take an assessment. You're going to see very low and you're going to see failing grades. And that's more typical if a student doesn't do anything throughout the unit, that their final grade, that test grade at the end, will be low. So if you look specifically at this student, they got 10 out of 50, 15 out of 50, 22 out of 50 on their quizzes, and even on the final assessment, they got a 50 out of 100, so that's a failing grade. So when we went back and did proficiency grading, that didn't work. They still had a failing grade. So at this point, you do need to go back and do some retesting. And not just that, the student didn't perform well on any of these assignments that we gave. They need to be some sort of alternate assignments that we give them.
In the video that Dr. Weigel presented prior to you all, she spoke about eye contracts. And that's a very important part of proficiency grading. Here at Cabell Midland, we talked about an eye contract, but our state system wouldn't accept the eye when we went to print the grade cards. So we do what's called a second chance contract. We print the grades as they are given. This student would receive an F on the grade card, And what would happen would be the teachers would meet with that student. They would give them a second chance contract and give them options of ways that they can show their proficiency in the specific I can statements that they have not mastered.
A few examples of that, I will have a student maybe go through some of the content that we've gone through and create a test with an answer key. Or they could, I could have them do a PowerPoint presentation about the material that we've been through. And then what are some things that you do for science? You have alternate assignment, the good alternate assignment.
If we do, like if it's a lab that they miss, instead of having that student perform that lab for that second chance contract, the student will tell me how they could find that data, create their own lab. And tell me how they could come up with the calculations and the data for that lab. So it's just kind of a reverse process, and that's enough to, turn it around and make it not the same assignment.
It's not the same, and at times it can be more difficult for students. So that there is another incentive that I use for my students. Do it now. Do your assignments now. Do well now so that you don't have to go back and play catch up later and do alternate assignments that you will be working a little more independently on. So there, we talk about responsibility. By the end of the year, they learn that. They learn that, no, I don't want to go back and have to do this stuff all over again, because we do make them do that.
And they realize that any retake that we give them, test or quiz-wise, it is not the same test as that we gave before. And that's been a really big realization for the students. They'll say, well, I'm not going to do any work, and I'm just going to see how I do on this test. And then they think they can retake the same test, and that's not the case. They have a different test to take, and they're usually bummed out by that. But that way I truly know if they learned it or if they just studied the old test.
Great. All of this is obviously some work and some great effort that you put in as a team of teachers to do that. What's been the result? What do you think? Has it been worth the effort to make these changes?
When I came to Cabell Midland, my first year here, I inherited a 9th grade class the previous year that had failed 60-some students. I can't remember the exact number. Our failure rate by total number of bodies is down now to less than 15 students fail the 9th grade each and every year. And if you look at the research, it's really important that during that transition year that the students are able to realize that they can perform in high school and that they can complete the work and that they can matriculate to 10th grade. So our matriculation rates have increased profoundly. And what has happened with our teaching staff is they realize that what they are doing, while it was hard work in the very beginning and is something that we continue to work and refine each and every year, it's benefiting our students and it's giving them the understanding that this isn't so hard, that they can do this, and that they can graduate from high school.
It's helped me as a teacher. I now only teach what I'm supposed to teach. I stick to the standards and only go in depth as much as the learning target asks. I'm not teaching to a book or what I feel they need to know. I'm teaching what they're going to be tested on later. When I create assignments and tests, I can use them from year to year because they're aligned exactly to my CSOs. I don't have to create new tests based on what I taught in class because they're aligned with the standards that they need to learn.
I would say it also has helped me because I know exactly what every single student in my class knows and what they don't know. You can look at your gradebook, and where I have my gradebook organized by I can statements, I can look at that specific statement and say, oh, student C, he got multi-step equations, but he's really struggling with those literal equations. I can look and I can know that just by looking at the organization of my gradebook.
That's great. Now, you've done this as a 9th grade academy, so are all the teachers in the 9th grade using a similar system?
Yes. Everyone in the 9th grade academy grades this way.
And how important was it to do that as a whole academy rather than just some individual teachers picking up and trying this?
We had to have a unified message in the ninth grade. Here at Cabell Midland, we have 4 ninth grade teams, and we had to be able, if one person was going to do this, the entire team had to own it, and the entire team had to do it. And as an academy, we had to come together and figure out how it was going to look for our students and for us. So what we were able to accomplish was common planning for our entire academy during first mod each and every day, and we've broken those days down into content meeting days. If you come to Cabell Midland High School on a Monday morning, you'll see all of our ninth grade science teachers in Ms. Atkins' room looking at the ICANN statements they're going to cover for the week. They're going to be talking about the lessons that they have designed and what they believe is going to work best for all of the students, so that the delivery of the lessons, while not exactly the same, are extremely similar. You'll see the same thing in mathematics and social studies and in English as well. It's really streamlined the process here, and it's made a huge difference for our teachers and for our students.
I think what's interesting here is that, you know, in the aspect of assessing for proficiency, you're really doing that, but this is your own system. I mean, you took some of the practices from your prior school, Kelly, but you also had to customize this to work within your state and district requirements and to do something that made sense within your school. So I think it points out that you can take some ideas from other places, but it really requires you to craft your own solution that's going to work best in your school setting.
Yes, Dick. Kelly always says that she'll bring things back from Atlantic that works down there, and we'll, like with the proficiency grading, and we wanted her to tell us how to do it. We said, okay, so what do we need to do? And she goes, I don't know. You need to tell me how you're going to make it work. You need to come up with your own. And anything that we've ever tried, she's always let the staff, it's taken years for us to get to the point where we're at, but we do build it from our own academy.
And from an administrative standpoint, if you go in and you tell people how to fix things, they're doing it your way. If they create the system and they are the ones who are going through the process, they own it. The ninth grade academy owns proficiency grading here at Cabell Midland. Each of them can speak to their practices just as well as these two ladies, and they understand exactly how it benefits not only their teaching practices, their content, but most importantly, their students.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, that speaks to what we know about good leadership and really empowering staff to come up and craft those solutions. We've talked about some practices here. I guess another question is, what suggestions do you have for teachers that might be listening to this, trying to pick up and bring some of this to create a system? What advice do you have for teachers that want to try this?
What really helped me was the learning targets. Once you have the learning targets or the I can statements, every assignment or assessment that is tied to that learning target, put it on the paper. Put it on the assignment or the test that you take. Break your assignments down by learning targets. If one says, I can tell the difference between transverse and longitudinal waves, have 3 questions on that. And then move on to the next I can statement and do another 3 questions on that one, so you can see really what your students know and what they do not know.
I agree with what they're saying, Dick. It all starts with that skills-based syllabus. If you don't understand what your learning targets are, proficiency grading is extremely difficult for you. And that's why it took us that year to create, at that time we were on 6-week grading periods, and we were creating a skills-based syllabus each 6 weeks. So that is where you have to start, is what is most important. And then you have to take the time to go back through all of the things that you have taught previously. And we're not saying you have to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but you have to look at what you've done previously and determine, what am I required to teach? What am I not required to teach, and how do I make this fit what I need to be doing?
I will add to that my first year that I did proficiency grading, I will say I failed miserably. I struggled. I really struggled, and I was doing what Kelly called the Great American Paper Chase, thinking that I could get all of these assignments from students at any time, and I was driving myself crazy, but I wasn't truly relying on that skills-based syllabus. My gradebook did not look like this. It had different tests in it that had a concept on it, but I didn't have specifically what was on each assignment, specifically what was on each test, and it drove me crazy. So the only way this has worked is to truly go back and do your skills, know what your content is, and present that to your students so they know it as well.
Yeah, and it's really building some ownership with them, that they understand clearly what you're trying to get them toward in that proficiency, and say, here's the work that needs to be done to get to that point. So it really reinforces a couple of things that we talked about in the structure of this model, is to make sure you're really assessing the essential learning. And a lot of times we end up giving grades on things that are just work that happen to be in the book, as you said, or happen to be things that we enjoy doing. And this is really saying, plan a curriculum that's very clear about what you want students to learn and the skills that they need to acquire, align those with standards, and then build out your assessment process to match that. We've got just a few minutes left. Any other questions from the participants, Gretchen?
Yep, we have one from the audience. They have their hand raised. Daniel Weigel, I'm going to unmute you now.
Yes, quick question in regards to the grades, and I may be just looking at it from quarter to quarter, but is there a finality to the grades once you get to the end of a quarter, or do you go back and search for those targets again if they didn't meet the proficiency during that quarter?
What our teachers actually do is they finalize the grade at the end of the quarter. And then if the student has received a D or an F, they meet with that student individually. They discuss the learning targets that they were not proficient in, and they give them what we call a second chance contract. Okay. And that second chance contract gives them the options of things that they can do to demonstrate proficiency where they haven't demonstrated it previously. The time limit on that second chance contract will vary depending upon the student, because sometimes it takes some students longer to master those learning targets than others, but our teachers like to keep it within a 2-week time frame after the end of the marking period.
Okay, I apologize. I must have missed that when you were talking about it initially.
Good, thank you.
Okay.
I want to begin to wrap up here with just reminding the participants about the tools that we've created in the Technical Assistance Center, the surveys for teachers to reflect on their practices. I think these are good conversation starters. If you were to sit down with your 9th grade team or department or your school and have teachers go through and answer those statements as to your assessment and grading practices, it could really open up some conversations. Do we need to do something differently? And an aspect of embarking on some of the practices that you've seen from the teachers from Cobble Midland today. So that survey is available on the Technical Assistance Center website. And for those of you that aren't from New York State, at the Successful Practices Network site and our new site that we've set up on the Career Readiness Institute, right now you can also get access to those surveys. There also are some instructional resources in articles and videos. We'll be adding this webinar and the suggestions that Rebecca and Jessica have shared with you today of the practices that they put in their school, the kinds of ideas that can help you in thinking about bringing some of those practices into your individual school. Here's the address for the Career Readiness Institute. This Career Readiness Institute is a new effort that we're embarking on with the Successful Practices Network to bring schools together to share good ideas about getting students particularly career ready, connecting with that college ready. And these surveys are just one part of what we'll be doing. I mentioned that this is a series. We have 4 more in the series. Once a week, we'll be back with the 4 remaining topics related to this particular model. Next week's session is on reward, creativity, and innovation, and bringing that into your instruction. I want to again thank first the participants for tuning in today to listen to the webinar. As Gretchen said, this recording will be available for you to go back and refer to, or to share with some of your colleagues from the website. But particularly Kelly Daniels, Rebecca, and Jessica, thank you so much for taking your time. This was beyond your school day to do this for us, but really felt you had a great story to tell about the practices that you've put in place. So thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. Gretchen, I'm going to skip that last poll question, so we will close it off.